Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, we are super close to the season. It's mind-blowing to me how fast the offseason has gone by, and we got preseason games starting in like a week. So, the preseason doesn't excite me all that much because we don't get to see a lot of our guys until, the final few preseason games. But it's cool to see football stuff happening again. The season is just right around the corner, so I'm stoked. I know you guys are as well. So for today's video, I'm going to be just pretty much telling you guys how to win your fantasy league. I mean, these are things that I do every year. I've had a lot of success over the years using these steps, and I just want to make sure that you guys win your league this year. So just really follow these steps. I'm not going to waste any of your time. I'm going to get right into it. We're going to be talking about how to win your fantasy league step by step. So the first thing that you need to do, one of the most important things, is to bet on bounce back players. Now, these are players like Russell Wilson, Tim Patrick, Darren Waller, DJ Moore, Mike Evans. These are guys that they didn't do as well as they were supposed to do last year, right? And so a lot of people, they're inclined to think that things are going to happen the exact same way as they did last year going into this season. That's why, there's all the copy and paste rankings where you see everyone pretty much just put in the same order as where they finished last year. A lot of times that's how people do their rankings. And because of this, there are certain players that have extreme value that fall way late in drafts because they underperformed last season. And people only remember the last thing they saw. So like when it comes to Russell Wilson, Russell Wilson is still good. Okay. This is a guy who is a talented quarterback. We've seen him play at an MVP level. He's been the best quarterback. One of the best quarterbacks in the NFL over the past 10 seasons. This dude is, a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's not that old yet. I believe he's 36 off the top of my head. He can still play at a high level. He's still got it. The team was poorly coached last season. Nathaniel Hackett was one of the worst NFL head coaches I've ever seen. They brought in Sean Payton, who's one of the better coaches in the NFL. He's going to turn this organization around. They're loaded with talent. Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, right? This is a talented offense. They've got Javonte in the backfield, although Javonte might be a little slow because of the ACL. But the bottom line is this offense can still be very good. So Russ is a great bounce back candidate, and you can get him as like the 18th quarterback off the board because everybody is, disappointed in what he did last year, so they think he's going to come out and do the same thing. This is how you gain an edge in fantasy, guys. Guys that are coming off pinnacle seasons are going to come at a high draft price. So although they're elite options a lot of times, you got to pay a lot to get him, whereas you can get somebody like Russell Wilson in the later rounds, and he doesn't cost nearly as much because he's coming off a bust season. Same thing with Darren Waller, huge bounce-back candidate of mine. DJ Moore, we haven't really seen the massive breakout season yet, but we know that the talent is there, and he's finally in an offense with a quarterback with a strong enough arm to really get him the ball downfield. And then Mike Evans, we've seen him print 1,000-yard seasons throughout his career, coming off a little bit of a bust season last year. He had that one game late in the year where he absolutely exploded, and it kind of made his overall numbers look better than they were. But, guys, it's Mike freaking Evans. He's not that old yet. I'm going to say he has still one really good season in him. And while Baker Mayfield hasn't been that good of an NFL quarterback, he gets a little bit of a bad rap. He's better than people give him credit for. He was in a Browns system that just wasn't built around the pass. They were built around the run. So naturally, his fantasy numbers weren't going to be that good. And when he did get his opportunities to pass, he just wasn't really in a rhythm because that offense was simply built to run the ball. And so while they had some offensive talent as far as wide receivers, they just weren't an offense that was built to pass. So I think that Baker Mayfield was made out to look a little bit worse than he actually is. He actually has a pretty good deep ball. And, so you look at Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, right? This is going to be the most talented wide receiving core that Baker Mayfield's ever played with. So I think that the offense can actually bounce back and be pretty decent this season. I'm not necessarily betting on them to be a good offense, but if they could be a middle-of-the-pack offense, every single player, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rachaad White, every player in their offense comes at an elite value if their offense even manages to be average. So bet on these bounce-back players. You can get great values with them. Next on my list is you guys need to collect target hog wide receivers. Now, in today's NFL, it's more and more of a passing league. There's more split backfields as far as the running backs, right, as we know. So you've really got to build your team around wide receivers. So what I recommend is that 2 out of your first 4 picks need to be a wide receiver, or 3 out of your first 4 picks need to be a wide receiver. Under no circumstance would I take 3 running backs and just 1 wide receiver. You need either 2 wide receivers or 3 wide receivers through the first 3 rounds. And then obviously if you want to draft Travis Kelce, you can go like tight end, wide receiver, running back. But I certainly wouldn't completely neglect running back through the first 4 rounds either because, the running back position can be extremely polarizing this season with people devaluing the position and, wide receivers going early, if you get a guy like Tony Pollard or Christian McCaffrey or Bijan that absolutely runs away with the field at the running back position, that player could be the biggest league winner in all of fantasy. And considering the fact that it's hard to even have a legit running back one in your lineup now without the split backfields, that can give you huge point swing positions at the running back position on a weekly basis. So you still need to make sure you're taking a shot at one of these super high upside running backs early, along with building your team around 2 or 3 wide receivers with your first 4 picks. Next on my list is I want you guys to keep in mind, if you're planning on going early quarterback, the reason the quarterback position was so polarizing last year wasn't just because quarterbacks have higher ceilings now. That is certainly part of it, because with the increased rushing upside and the increased passing in the league, the quarterback just has a higher ceiling than it's really ever had. But with that being the case, you've also got to look at the fact that Justin Herbert was injured playing with a rib fracture all season. Dak Prescott missed 5 games. Russell Wilson was an unexpected colossal bust when he could have competed for one of the top quarterback spots. Lamar Jackson missed 5 games. Deshaun Watson was suspended for an entire season. Look at all these quarterbacks that could have competed for the quarterback one spot that really didn't even have a fair chance to get it because of the circumstance. So, with all these guys coming in, being ready, healthy, ready to go, suspensions out of the way, ready for the season, a lot of these guys can compete with Hurts, Allen, and Mahomes for the top spot. So to just assume that those 3 quarterbacks are going to come out and be the quarterback 1, 2, 3 again is absolutely ridiculous. It very often does not happen that way, where quarterbacks repeat in the exact same spot in back-to-back seasons. Now, we have seen that kind of consistency from Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes, so you could probably trust that they're both going to really do well, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be a top 3 quarterback. And, these quarterbacks that you're getting in the later round, you could get at a better value. So while a lot of people are preaching early quarterback, I still think it's a better move value-wise to just wait on guys like Justin Herbert in the middle rounds, Deshaun Watson in the mid to later rounds. These guys give you the exact same ceiling as Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen, and you could get them later in the draft, right? So, to me, it just makes more sense to wait on the mid to late round, not super late round quarterbacks, but the mid to semi-late round quarterbacks, guys like Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, or even Tua. And, with that being said, I'm not saying you can't take an early quarterback, but it can certainly provide you an advantage to wait at least a little bit on the position and spend your top 3 picks on running backs or wide receivers or Travis Kelce as opposed to the quarterback position. Next on my list is I need you guys to understand the importance of stacking. When it comes to stacking offenses, it essentially helps you consolidate your bet, right? It essentially helps you bet on one thing happening instead of 2, right? So, like, if you have a Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert stack, and Keenan Allen has an awesome season, Justin Herbert pretty much automatically has an awesome season to go along with it. There's very few scenarios where Keenan Allen absolutely goes off, but Justin Herbert doesn't, right? So by betting on Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert to go off, or just by betting on Keenan Allen to go off and tying him to Justin Herbert, all you're betting on is one thing happening, and that's Keenan Allen having a great season, and then Justin Herbert automatically comes along with it. So you're consolidating your bet. You're betting on one thing to happen and getting production out of 2 players. That's the idea behind stacking. So make sure that you're stacking quarterback, wide receiver stacks especially, and quarterback, running back stacks, even with running backs that catch passes, and quarterback and elite tight end, everything like that. So make sure that you're stacking offenses and at least get one of those elite stacks for your team. Next on my list is you guys need to give your rookies time to develop. I see this every single season. People draft their rookies and they don't perform for the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season, and everyone's dropping them or trading them for scraps. And it makes absolutely no sense. I said this with Christian Watson last season, and a lot of people were giving me crap for it. I said, draft Christian Watson. He's going to be slow out of the gate, and he's going to explode in the second half of the season. I called that before the season started, right? I was telling everyone, draft Christian Watson, stash him on your bench, let him get some time to develop, and then he's going to explode. That's exactly what happened. So what you've got to understand is that rookies, sometimes they take a little bit of time to get going. And, sometimes they don't ever pan out in their rookie season. But, considering the fact that a lot of times you can get these guys later in the draft because they're rookies, it's your best course of action to draft them, give them some time to develop, and I would just kind of hold on to them till the end of the season and wait till they have that potential explosion, because you're not really looking at a whole lot of draft capital. If you're waiting, round 9 or 10 to get Dalton Kincaid, that's not like super high draft capital, right? So, if he ends up busting throughout the entire course of the season, so be it. But he could break out and be the tight end, 3 in the second half of the season. So, when you're drafting guys that are rookies and have tremendously high upside, Jahmyr Gibbs, one of them too, If they don't explode right out of the gate, don't trade them for scraps or drop them off your roster. Give them time to develop, because odds are they're going to have a way bigger second half of the season than they do first half when they get used to playing at an NFL speed and actually get some real game reps. So be patient with your rookies. Give them time to develop. Don't drop them off your roster. Don't trade them. Next is weeks 1 through 3. You need to leverage the trade market in your favor because, well, you look at these players that come out and they bust in the early weeks of the season, right? And people, they're very reactionary to weeks 1, 2, and 3, and they're ready to trade these players, dump these players off their roster. I see it every single season. I'll tell somebody to draft a guy, and then they'll bust in the first 2 weeks, and they'll be like, what the heck, Bryce? You told me to draft this guy. I'm like, dude, it's week 2. There's 17 weeks to the season, right? There's 17 games in the season. 2 weeks does not mean anything, right? In fact, sometimes it gives you an opportunity to buy low on other players. So if you draft a guy with high hopes and they end up being a bust over the first 1, 2, 3, even 4, even 5 weeks of the season, that does not necessarily mean they're going to bust. So, if a player has a whole lot of promise and you think reasonably that they have a lot of upside for the season, don't trade them off your roster just because they bust in the early weeks, especially considering the fact that you're not going to get a whole lot of value from them anyway when they're playing badly, because nobody wants to trade for a player that's coming off multiple bust weeks. So the best course of action is usually to just hold on to that player, give them some time to develop. And, if you use logic and say, hey, this player looks like they have some serious upside, I like the offense, it's most likely just been early season bust kind of stuff. Just make sure to account for this and don't panic. Don't trade guys off your roster in weeks 1, 2, and 3. Give them time. Next and final thing on my list is probably the most important thing on here, actually, and that's to draft a super deep roster of running backs and wide receivers. Now, the reason I say this is because you look at your championship teams every year, and towards the end of the season, your roster looks significantly different than it did when you drafted your team. Even if you win a championship, there are times when I've won a title and literally all 9 of my positions were different by the end of the season. It's not usually like that, but sometimes it is that extreme. And, a lot of times, very often, 40 to 50% of my roster is way different than it was on draft day. So what you've got to keep in mind is that running back and wide receiver depth is everything. Fantasy is essentially won by having the best running backs and wide receivers, because what this does is it allows you to account for your players that bust, because some of the players that you draft are going to bust no matter how much it looks like they're not going to. They will. It happens every season. And sometimes your guy off your bench comes on and ends up being your better player. And then a lot of times there's just injuries. Football is a violent sport. There's tons of injuries in this game. You're going to need backup running backs and wide receivers to account for these injuries. And the reason I say this is because a lot of people start drafting, kickers and defenses, and they're just so anxious to fill out their starting lineup that they're drafting defenses and kickers in round 12 and 13. Don't do it, guys. Bolster your depth until rounds 15 and 16. Rounds 15 and 16 is where you draft your defense or kicker. I don't want anybody that follows my channel to start drafting their defense or kickers in rounds 12 and 13. This is going to give you a massive disadvantage because you're missing out on those huge upside sleepers that could break out and be league-winning players for you in the later rounds. So make sure that you're bolstering your roster with tons of depth at the running back and wide receiver position. And what this also does is if you're super deep at one of the two, like if you draft a lot of running backs and a lot of wide receivers and your wide receivers don't pan out, but your running backs do, there's going to be other teams in the league that are weak at running back, and you could trade one of your depth pieces for an elite wide receiver, and it won't even take somebody out of your starting lineup. All right, guys, appreciate you tuning into the video. If you guys want more advice from me, make sure to head over to my Patreon. I launched it about a month and a half ago for this channel. And there's all kinds of tremendously helpful advice on there. You can basically go on there. You can get my top 70 overall rankings. I'm going to have a top 150 overall rankings by the time the season starts. So I'm growing that rankings list, but my top 70 rankings is already out. I've got my top 10 stacks for best ball leagues and elite best ball strategies, how to profit in best ball. I can help you guys make money playing fantasy football. It's a tremendously helpful tool. The Patreon community is growing rapidly. So, if you want to join a group of like-minded individuals that are absolute badasses and are making money at fantasy football and win money with sports betting and just have a good time and get all kinds of relevant information and extra stuff, all my exclusive content, articles, databases, one-on-one advice in video format that, I can answer any one of your questions that you have for me in fantasy football with a detailed answer in video format to your specific question. So you can get all kinds of extra advantages by joining my Patreon. It also tremendously supports the channel. So if you're somebody that enjoys my content and you want to support this channel and help keep it going, go join my Patreon. It goes a long way. It's tremendously helpful for me. It's going to be even more helpful for you. I really appreciate it, guys. All right, thanks for tuning into the video. Catch you later.